This is chapter 4. It's actually, in my opinion, the most important chapter of the entire textbook. Understanding this is of critical importance because without an understanding, how interest rates feed into financial markets and into financial markets and financial institutions, it's interest rates, the price of money, that is driving everything. And so that's really what we're going to look at here in this chapter. The thing that we're going to see here, I mean, most of you have heard of what interest rates are. That's not going to be a new term for probably any of you in this course. But what is probably going to be different is that there are multiple ways to measure that interest rate. And the way that we're going to tend to focus on in this chapter and in this course is the yield to maturity. That's going to be a way of measuring the interest rate that is most accurate for our purposes. What that, as a definition, what that yield to maturity is basically an internal rate of return. And it's, if we were looking at something like a bond, then what that would be is the internal rate of return that's earned by the investor who bought that bond today, assuming that the bond was held all the way until maturity, until the principal was all paid back, and assuming that all the interest payments were paid at the right time. It's how much that investment would have paid off. That is our yield to maturity, that internal rate of return. Now, I'm going to skip again learning objectives, again, presuming that you can read those on your own. To understand what an interest rate is, besides just saying it's the price of money, we need to know what the term present value is. The idea behind present value is that money that is given to someone today is more valuable than money that's given to someone in the future. And that difference is going to be determined by the interest that could have been earned in that period of time. Or, as we can see here, if it was $1 paid today versus $1 paid in the future, then if you took the money, if you had to get paid the equivalent amount in the future, you would need to get $1 plus the interest rate that could have been earned in the meantime. Because if I'm given that dollar today, I can invest it. I can do things with it. If I'm not given the money until the future, it has a reduced value. And because it has a reduced value, then I need to know what that interest rate is that I could have earned. And that would give me an idea of what the discount rate is, or what the present value is in this case. Let's look at the equation for those of you who think in terms of equations. Let's presume that the interest rate is 10%. Okay, so here's the issue. As you can kind of see with these equations here, we're talking about things in terms of $100. So let's set up this scenario. I can give you $100 today, or I can give you the equivalent amount a year from now. When I say the equivalent amount, it would not be $100. It has to be something more than $100 because I'm waiting for a year to get the money. How much different would it be? Well, as we can see here, it would be $100, which is that original amount I could get now, times 1 plus the interest rate. Then you can see that if it's 2 years from now, I need to square it. If it's 3 years from now, I need to cube it. And what this is saying is that $100 today is the same as getting $133 3 years from now. That the two are essentially the same. And we found that through the present value. And if we want to look at the equation for that present value, if we wanted to just rephrase that, it would be the present value is equal to the future payment, which in this case would be that I pay you $100 3 years from now, divided by 1 plus the interest rate to the time period power. And you can see this happening here if we look at this over time. That if I were to pay you, again, $100 now, then $100 now has a present value of $100. $100 given to me a year from now has to have a higher value. 2 years from now, an even higher value. And we could go out all the way to a large number of n. Okay. We need to understand these interest rates in terms then of there are basically 4 types of credit market instruments out there. Basically 4 ways that we can package a loan. The first would be the simple loan. The simple loan is pretty easy in the sense that it's basically equal monthly payments. And with these equal monthly payments, the interest rate is pretty easily determined. A fixed payment loan, that's basically like a mortgage. And in a fixed payment loan, it's amortized. And essentially what we're seeing here is that in that fixed payment, there are 2 things going on. There is a principal payment and an interest payment, and that as time goes on, the interest portion of it is becoming less, and the principal part of it is becoming larger. Coupon bonds are not out there that much anymore. What a coupon bond is basically a physical bond that has tearaway strips on it, coupons on it, and those can be redeemed for semi-annual interest payments. Then we have discount bonds. And we do see those quite a bit. Discount bonds are basically bonds that are sold for less than their face value. Basically sold at a discount in order to reflect the fact that the interest rate that's being paid for the bond is something different than what the current interest rate is. Now, going back to this topic of yield to maturity. Under yield to maturity, again, I discussed it as basically, again, an internal rate of return. You could think of it basically as the interest rate that ensures that the present value of the cash flow payments that the present value of the cash payments received is equal to the value that I'm receiving today. So if we look at yield to maturity in this example here, and we saw that for year 2, what was it? Year 2, 121. So if I knew this was 100 and I knew this was 121 after 2 years, that's basically the equivalent of a 10% rate of return, which is what the I is, what the interest rate is. That is our yield to maturity. And we can see that in this example where it's drawn out a little bit further here. Again, talking about having $100, that a year from now is $110. And if we solve for I, in essence, for this simple loan, the interest rate is the same as the yield to maturity. The two are the same. It is how the two are equal. Now, if we look at it from a fixed payment loan perspective, what we're seeing here now is that the value of the loan, which is on the left-hand side of the equation, is equal to the payment amount that's occurring divided, and then I guess basically discounted. By discounted, we mean 1 plus the interest rate. They divide the future value, the fixed payment value in the future, by the 1 plus the interest rate. And for coupon bond, now what I need to do is I need to discount, which is again what's always happening here in the denominator, is basically the way we discount or dismiss a future payment for the fact that I received it in the future. And here we're just going to say that the price of this coupon bond is equal to how much am I getting in a year from redeeming these coupons and what its present value is. 1 plus the interest rate. If the bond, if that coupon bond ends up being priced at its face value, so basically a $1,000 bond is purchased for $1,000, then the yield to maturity is the same as the coupon rate. Where they differ would be if the coupon rate, if the price of the bond is less than its face value, meaning that there's a discount to a discount bond. In that case, again, it's occurring because the yield to maturity is greater than the bond interest rate that's stated on the bond. So as an example of that last bullet point, if I were to buy a bond right now, bonds are paying very, very little. Let's just make our life easy here and just say it's paying 1%. 5 years from now, we don't know what the situation is going to look like. What if the interest rate is 5% 5 years from now? And I've got this 1% bond that I bought in the year 2021. Then the only way I'm going to sell that bond that's paying that really, really low interest rate is by basically selling it at a discount. Hence, discount bond. And we can calculate these. If I have a bond that has a 10% stated coupon rate, and that bond has a $1,000 value, then where the coupon rate is the same as the price of the bond. The yield to maturity is the same as the interest rate. So that we know is 10%. Where the bond is selling for less than 1,000, then I better start to see interest rates that are higher than 10%. And where it's selling basically at a premium, then these yield to maturities are going to be less than the coupon rate. And that's primarily because people are realizing, wow, that's a really good bond you've got there. A 5% bond when the interest rate used to be 1%. Or in this case here, I must have a bond that's paying more than 10%, let's say 15%. Then because I have this 15% bond and the current interest rate, let's say, is 8%, then I have to pay a premium for it. And it's going to get pretty darn close to that current 8% interest rate. Now, some bonds don't actually have a maturity date. These are known as perpetuity bonds. You could see these with... it's not that the maturity date is unknown, such as it is when, like, if you're an insurance company and you're making a monthly payment to a policy holder. That's not what this is. This is just saying that the coupon payments are going to be paid forever, and the principal is basically never repaid. Then in that case, the price of that bond is going to be whatever that interest payment is, and having that divided by the yield to maturity. And that's going to get us, again, pretty close to the interest rate for that item. And the fourth and final one was, again, the discount bond, where I'm taking basically the difference between the face value and the current price. And if there's a positive difference, then there must be a difference between the coupon rate that's printed on the bond and what the actual bond rate is in the marketplace. Now, interest rates are not necessarily the return for an investment, the rate of return for an investment. And that's because, in essence, you've got to buy the bond itself. You have to take on some of the risk that way. And if we look at what individuals could have invested in otherwise, that's going to play a role as well. That opportunity cost for that investment is going to be part of the rate of return as well. So, the further out that maturity is for a bond, then essentially I got to get paid a higher interest rate to reflect that added risk to not getting it over a longer period of time. And plus, we don't know what the current interest rate's going to be for whatever that time period is way off in the future. And so because we don't know that, we as an investor are taking a risk as well. These bonds are sensitive the prices of these bonds actually fluctuate a great deal, and it's not necessarily because of the credit quality of the issuer of the bond. Meaning, it's not because, let's say, it's IBM or Ford, some big company. Their rate of return for that bond is less that it's IBM or whatever it is, although that does matter that it's like a investment grade bond to buy. Rather, what is again driving the price here is all going to be what the current interest rate is versus what is the interest rate that's printed on the bond. And to the extent that there's a difference between the two, that's going to have to be reflected in the bond's price, because that can be adjusted. I can't adjust the interest rate that's already contained in the bond. And you can see this then kind of nice chart that summarizes how far out the bond is going to maturity, where at the max it's at 30 years. And then assuming, and this is a big assumption, assuming that the yield stays constant, which we wouldn't expect it to do. Then if I bought this $1,000 bond, which is what's given to us by column 3, then what column 4 is telling us is what should be the price of that $1,000 bond next year. And we're saying that for that bond that's going to mature in 30 years from now, that I paid $1,000 for, 1 year from now, that bond is going to be priced at $503. And the reason why it's reduced in this case is because, again, there's a great deal of uncertainty in that 30 years that's happening. That might mean I don't get paid back, or I do get paid back, but the interest rate that's being earned is less than what it is out there in the real world. As I already said, the longer the date of the bond, the farther out it is. Those are generally going to be riskier. And because they are riskier, then the discount price of the bond needs to match that and makes it lower. The final big thing we need to do in this chapter is we need to distinguish between the real interest rate and the nominal interest rate. The nominal interest rate is just generally what's printed on most loan documents, things like that. So the nominal rate, it doesn't take into account what the interest rate is in the market as a whole. And so in real terms, what we need to then do is we need to define that real value, we need to remove, I guess let's put it this way. To find that real value, we need to have some sense of what the inflation rate is, or what the purchasing power, how much it's been reduced by. And that's going to give us a sense of the real interest rate. It's generally going to be lower than the nominal interest rate because in general we do have inflation. And you see that equation here with the Fisher equation, where the nominal interest rate, what's on the left-hand side of this equation, is equal to the real interest rate plus the expected inflation rate. Which is, again, why when I think of my mortgage that I got for 2.75%, I tell people it's very difficult for the bank to make money on that mortgage. And that's largely because even if you take out what the expected inflation rate is, that's going to basically wipe out all of the interest rate right there. And I'm not sure I see much of a reason as to why the bank offered a rate so low, even if there's a lot of cash out there to be invested. In general, we should see the real rates and nominal rates move closely with one another, with the difference between the red line and the blue line being the inflation rate from an expected basis. Okay. You'll learn a little bit more once you start doing some of the problems from the textbook. But what this gives us here is an understanding again of what yield to maturity is, so that we can use that to understand how it's generally the same, although it can deviate a little bit from the interest rate.